I am here outside of Minos at 4:45 the next morning. It is absolutely brick outside, and I am blowing white clouds of breath underneath the streetlight long before I light my first cigarette of the day. I tuck my new winter coat tighter around my body and stomp my booted feet on the concrete sidewalk to try and work some feeling back into them. My hand shakes uncontrollably as I try to hold the cigarette still to my mouth to take a drag off it. It's even more difficult to draw in a steady breath with my teeth chattering so hard the sound of them clattering together is nearly deafening in my head. I'm not entirely sure it's the cold that has me trembling so hard. Weather says there's a bad storm coming down from Canada, due to reach the city in a few days, a once-a-century blizzard, and I can feel it deep in my bones. Then again, that could be the overwhelming sense of dread that I've been feeling since I woke up this morning at exactly 3 a.m. I had a dream last night. I was sitting at the top of Dino's Wonder Wheel at Coney Island. The amusement park was dark. Everything was. None of the city lights in the distance were visible. There was no sound of traffic, no police sirens. It was like the entire city of New York had disappeared. Coney Island was gone too. Absolutely none of the void was lit up, just the Ferris wheel glittering below me that I was somehow sitting at the top of, even though it was completely still, not rotating. I was wearing a black suit in the dream, with a black shirt and a black tie. I hadn't worn a suit since the days of attending Mass with my Nonna and my Pop-Pop every Saturday night and Sunday morning. I hadn't worn a black suit since the day they laid my mother and father in the ground right beside each other in matching caskets. In that weird way of dreams, some part of me knew it was the middle of winter when I had fallen asleep in my comfortable bed, but now there was a pleasant summer breeze blowing through the empty black void around me. I smelled smoke. That was when I realized I wasn't alone in the booth. In this place where 8 million people had suddenly disappeared from existence, I wasn't alone in the darkness. I turned my head to the side and stared into empty eye sockets. Somehow, though, I knew he was still watching me. His torn lips spread in a wide grin, showing raw gums with fresh empty holes in them. There was a cigarette clinch between them. That was where the smoke was coming from. How he had even lit it with just the bloody stumps of his wrists was beyond me at that moment. "Anthony," I said, and my voice seemed to echo loudly into the void even though I could barely bring myself to whisper. He was naked, just like he'd been found in the river. I can see into the empty gaping hole of his abdomen where his intestines, stomach, and liver used to be, the crest of his bare pelvis, and every now and again a puff of smoke seeped out through his exposed ribs, leaving the hanging end of his trachea, as there were no lungs in his chest anymore to hold the smoke in. "Dzień dobry, sąsiedzie," he said to me. "Good day, neighbor," just like he said every day as we passed each other on the apartment stairs to the laundry in the basement. I didn't know how he was forming the words because inside of his mouth there was only the very root of his tongue wriggling around behind his lips. He gave a gurgling, wet laugh and nudged me with his elbow like we were sharing an inside joke together. There was a hole in his bicep down to the bone. There used to be the tattoos of 3 coffins lined up there, a skull and crossbones underneath it, and the initials OOR and SOS. And I knew as I looked at the shiny white ends of his exposed clavicle and the bare ball sockets of his shoulders that there used to be an 8-pointed star tattooed on each side and a pair of epaulets above them, decorated with 3 skulls. His sternum rose and fell with each rattling impossible breath, and I knew there used to be the tattoo of a rose there in the center of his chest. He had never once told me how he got the tattoos, but I'd read an article once, when I was drunk and bored and a little overly curious about some of my new neighbors, on the language of Russian prison tattoos. The rose on his chest meant he'd turned 18 in prison. The skull and crossbones meant he'd been given a life sentence for 3 murders, what the coffins represented. OOR stood for Osobo Opasnym Recidivistom, especially dangerous recidivists, the cream of the crop that was never going to see the light of day outside of prison walls again because of the heinous nature of their crimes. The SOS meant Spasite Outsider, save me from judgment. The stars and the epaulets meant he had rank in the criminal world. It was probably how he had gotten out of a life sentence in a Russian prison in the first place. Autoritet, he said, beating the stump of his wrist against his chest with a hollow, echoing sound. And then, Obshok. A brigadier, the first meant. He'd run a crew for the Pecan. The Obshok meant he'd also been one of the 2 spies, the security group that worked beside the Sovietnik, the support group, to make sure nobody beneath them gained too much power in the organization, the Brotherhood, the Bratva. Brighton isn't going to sit down for this one. War is coming, little Bratok. Be ready. You're a part of this now. He took one last draw of his cigarette and dipped his head to the side. For some reason I held my hand out to him, palm up. A drop of blood slithered out of his mouth and landed in the center of my cupped hand, and then he dipped his head further and put his cigarette out just over the lifeline on my palm. I woke with a gasp, my bedclothes soaked with sweat. I was freezing to death. The boiler in the sub-basement must have been fucking up again, and only Anthony knew how to get it going when it went down. I could see my breath in the frigid air of my apartment, and as I pushed myself upright in bed, my elbow buckled beneath me and I fell onto my back again. My hand hurt like hell. I reached to the side and turned on the lamp that sat on my IKEA nightstand. I held my hand up in front of my bleary eyes. There in the flesh of my palm was a red weeping hole. It had formed a blister and I'd popped it when I put pressure on my hand. It was the mark of a cigarette burn. I hear the jingling of a bell. I look up and see Jimmy unlocking the front door of the restaurant. It's still dark inside, but in the glow of the streetlight I can see he's wearing a pair of red silk pajama pants and no shirt. Across his right pectoral muscle I see the words La Mala Vita, tattooed in a swirling cursive script, the wretched life. And below it, Lealtà senza fedeltà, loyalty without faithfulness. The lean, cut lines of his abdomen are obscured behind an ace bandage that he's got wrapped around him. The hole in his stomach might be gone, but it's clear by the way the man holds himself that it still causes him pain. He looks tired. It's almost like there are lines in his face that weren't there yesterday. He doesn't say anything to me but waves me inside, and I enter behind him as he turns back into the restaurant. His hand sweeps again. He means for me to follow him. We head back into the second dining room. The 2 bodies of the Zbrovsky brothers are still lying on the floor, but there's a bit less of them now than there was yesterday. I can see the grooves left behind by molars and the picked clean bones of their arms and legs. I remember what Anthony had said to me in the dream, that the boys over in Brighton Beach weren't going to stand for what had happened to him and his brothers. The blood has congealed on the floor, and as I pass, I see a fly has landed on one of the small one's open, staring eyes. His name had been Wojciech, I remind myself. That night at the sports bar a few months ago, watching a Poland versus Korea World Cup match on the TV while sharing a bottle of vodka with my new neighbors, seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. I hear another blowfly buzzing around inside of one of Misha's empty eye sockets. His head is still exactly where it was yesterday, sitting, oddly enough, in the empty plate that was still on the table. Don't worry about them, Jimmy says in a gravelly voice as he steps over Misha's headless body and we track to the left, opposite of the kitchen door, opening a door printed with the sign Employees Only. Cleanup crew is coming in a few hours. Trash won't be here much longer. Nia'd help me out more, but she'll be weak for a few days yet, and she can't eat that much in one sitting anyway. Meat's no good once it's not fresh. There's a few more booths back here. A full bar to the left and a billiards table in the center of the room. I see an open door ahead of me with a massive mahogany desk and some antique bookshelves glittering with tiny porcelain figurines of women in flowing old ball gowns. We head to the right now, opening a door that leads down a concrete stairwell. We pass down 2 flights of stairs into what must be the sub-basement. There's an apartment down here, a neat little living room all done in shades of cream and a stainless steel adorned kitchenette. I keep following him through another doorway. Bianchi, Nia, I guess, is sitting nude in the bed, silk sheets pulled around her hips. Her blonde hair is down, laying loose and curling around her bare shoulders. I carefully avert my eyes from her exposed breasts, but she makes no effort to hide herself from my gaze. She opens her arms to Jimmy, no more blood on her tiny hands now. He crawls stiffly across the bed on his hands and knees, stretching out on his stomach and laying his head in her lap. She releases a purring noise I can almost feel in my own chest and begins petting Jimmy's head once more. He closes his eyes and sighs, the sound both exhausted and content, and tosses a hand out to me again. Sit. There's an armchair there, with a tiny side table next to it. I seat myself and see that there's a single sheet of paper with an expensive gold fountain pen laying on top of it. Fill the rest of it out. It's a job application. Most of it has already been filled out with a typewriter. There's my full legal name, my address and apartment number, my social security and driver's license number, even my old Department of Corrections inmate number. Jesus Christ. My eyes slip down the page to what is still blank. Emergency contacts, it says. I'm gonna need the names and addresses of all your family members, Jimmy mumbles to me with his eyes closed. And I wouldn't suggest you lie. I'll find out soon enough if you do, and I ain't got the energy nor the patience to deal with it today. Why? Bursts out of my mouth. I sound like a panicked child, but I already know the answer. An insurance policy, Bianchi chirps to me. Consider it a non-compete clause. It ensures your loyalty to the familia. My hands are back to trembling again. I swallow hard and blink back the burning tears in my eyes that nearly completely obscure my vision as I begin printing my sister's name on the first blank on the page. Nia sniffs the air and then gives another rumbling purr. Poor little soldato. How did you burn yourself this morning?